Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I want to bring your attention to a video by Lee over at Inside the Distance Boxing. It's a great channel. Go and give him a sub. I'll leave the link to this video in the descriptions box. But he was talking about Anthony Joshua, and he said some things that sort of really resonated with me and which I think bear sort of repeating. He said that he's very annoyed because people talk about the old Anthony Joshua and the new Anthony Joshua, and Lee contends that there's really no such thing. It's really a progression, and that Joshua is kind of learning and refining his style. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said here, but he really objects to the idea that people want the old Anthony Joshua back, because the old Anthony Joshua is long gone, and it's not a bad thing that he's gone, because his actual performances, technically, in terms of mixing the powers perhaps with the technique, is that's coming together. That's what he's worked on. And then of course there's he's older and so on and so forth, and there are other aspects, other intangibles you have to factor in. But now I know what he's getting at. I do agree in terms of technique. Yes, okay, but where I kind of disagree, half disagree, is that there definitely, in my mind, is an old and a new Joshua, in the sense, psychologically, the man's psyche, his confidence level, all of that stuff is very equally as important as evolving technically as a fighter. In terms of experience, in terms of new stuff learnt, as far as getting into the ring and knowing which punches to use when, and perhaps your ring IQ increases and all that stuff's relevant. But the old Joshua seemed to have that killer mentality, and I think now, or perhaps for the last couple of years, he's not had that, or he's been perhaps a little bit too reliant on worrying about his technique. Whereas I thought against Wallin, for example, he had the blend right. He had the balance right between, letting it all hang out, being aggressive, being front-footed, and balancing that out with, some sensible boxing. Punching at the correct time, not leaving yourself defensively vulnerable, and so on. But like I said, I'm going to leave that link to Lee's to Inside the Distance is the channel. I'll leave that link in the descriptions box, and I want you to have a look at it and give him a sub. It's a good channel, and it's a growing channel. But one thing that he did say that I thought was really interesting is he talked about Lennox Lewis, and how Lewis was considered to be, feeble and weak-minded and gun-shy after being beaten by Oliver McCall, and then Emmanuel Stewart got hold of him and developed him into an all-time great. Now, that's a really very astute comment to make, because people forget this. Don't forget, Lewis has been retired for over 20 years now. He retired in June of 2003. And his last fight was against Vitaly Klitschko, which was, we know, if you've seen it, it's a firefight, brilliant fight. And Lewis stopped Klitschko on a very, very bad cut, a hideous cut that I think went right down to the bone. That was in 6 rounds. And he never fought again. He never needed to fight again. And that was his one fight after the famous Mike Tyson fight. Tyson, by that point, was way, way, way past his best. Stopped Tyson in 8 rounds, knocked him out. But I've never really rated that performance by Lewis. I mean, he did what he had to do. He went through the motions. He did it. He executed a game plan well. My favourite Lewis fight, the one in which I think he showed everything that you need to show in terms of mental strength, psychological strength, the type of thing that a lot of people, myself included, feel Anthony Joshua has lacked over the last 2 or 3 years, was against Hasim Rahman in the rematch, because Rahman in 2021, I keep adding 20 years, 2001, April 2001, I think it was, he got knocked out. Lewis got knocked out by Ruckman in 5 rounds, a huge punch. Lewis had not taken the fight as seriously as he should have done. He was doing some acting, or at least appearing in Ocean's 11, the movie Ocean's 11. And, he hadn't given it time to... I mean, this was over in South Africa, by the way, so he needed to acclimatise. He hadn't given himself enough time, a little bit of jet lag, and he got chinned in 5 rounds. Now, Ruckman tried to avoid the rematch, and Lewis had to take him to court because contractually Ruckman was obliged to give Lewis the rematch. Cedric Kushner had been Ruckman's manager and promoter, or one of the other promoter, I think, and Don King had lured Ruckman away with the usual trick that he always used to try, which is to give a guy a suitcase full of money and say, "This is yours, take it. And as long as you sign with me, you can have this." And the guy goes, "Oh, yeah, thank you very much." Boom, boom, boom. Well, anyway, the court said, "No, you've got to fight Lewis again." So Ruckman went back in there. And there was even a fight in the studio when they were both being interviewed. Ruckman called Lewis gay. And Lewis didn't like this. He said, "If you think I'm gay, bring your sister over. Let's see who's gay." And they started rolling around on the floor in the studio. And in fact, Ruckman kind of got the better of Lewis a little bit in that little silly scrap. But when they got in the ring, Lewis obliterated Ruckman with one of the most picturesque knockouts of his entire career. He knocked him out in 4 rounds, which was a round earlier than Ruckman had done him. So this is all stuff I followed. I mean, I followed Lewis's career from start to finish. And this, to me, was the high point of his career because he showed an immense amount of mental strength, determination, and motivation, and perfectly executed a game plan. And he just destroyed the guy who previously had knocked him flat. Now, I think that was also the time when a lot of Americans suddenly started to rate Lewis, because Lewis had the 2 fights with Holyfield. The famous draw, which most people say wasn't a draw, it was a win for Lewis. And then in the rematch, which was actually, a lot of people think it's a closer fight, Lewis won a unanimous decision. But a lot of people were still saying, a lot of Americans were still saying, well, Holyfield's old. Lewis is bigger than him, and blah, blah, blah. Prior to those fights, Lewis was getting very little respect from America. And he was considered to be, chinny and didn't have a lot of bottle, even though he had that hellish fight with Ray Mercer. A lot of people say, well, yeah, he showed a bit of gumption there, but Mercer beat him. It was a very close decision. I think there was a point or two in it on all the cards. That was in 1996, I think. And Mercer, yeah, you can make a case for him winning. But the fact that Lewis showed a lot of bottle, even then the Americans weren't taking him seriously. And, he'd beaten people like Tommy Morrison, who he stopped in 6, and he'd beaten Henry Akinwande, who was disqualified, and Gallotta, he beat Gallotta in 1. Shannon Briggs got done in 5 rounds, although Lewis was shaken in that fight, and that was a shootout. Zelko Makrovic, is that his name? Makrovic, what was his name? Marovich, I think. I don't know. I'll have to check. Anyway, he was a guy who was undefeated at the time. Lewis got very little respect for any of these victories. Because people were still saying, yeah, but he got knocked out by Oliver McCall. And when they were talking about Lewis going in with Riddick Bowe, and Riddick Bowe famously gave up the WBC belt, even though Bowe had given up that belt, people were still saying he was the best heavyweight in the world. And no one was saying, you duck Lewis, even though he did duck Lewis. I mean, he really did genuinely duck him. He threw the belt in the bin, and there was a famous picture of him throwing it into a dustbin. But people were still saying Bowe was better. And I think before Lewis, when Bowe was at his absolute zenith, when he beat Holyfield the first time, had he fought Lewis next, he'd have beaten him, in my opinion, because Lewis wasn't ready. He hadn't developed into the fighter that we know. He was with Pepe Correa at the time, and he hadn't beaten anywhere near the level of fighters that Bowe had done, and he just wasn't developed. He hadn't got with Manuel Stewart. So at that point, Bowe should have fought him, and I would have picked Bowe to be a hot favourite in that fight. But of course, Bowe ate his way out of the title and didn't really. He had some good wins on his record. I think he was a very, very good fighter, but his career, the longevity of his career was cut short by his lifestyle. Ring any bells? But the point of all this is that Lennox Lewis is now considered to be a great heavyweight champion. But for most of his career, certainly in America, he was dismissed as being nothing special. They didn't care about him. He's nothing. And I think, just as Lee in Inside the Distance Boxing alluded to in his video, I think the same will be true of Anthony Joshua. I think when Joshua's career is over, people will look back and say, this guy was actually pretty good. You know, if you want another example, I'm not going to go into his career like I did with Lewis's, but another example is Frank Bruno, who was never as good as Lewis. But nevertheless, even though he had defeats on his record, they were all to world champions, and he fought in a very good era. And people now remember him as being better than he actually was thought of at the time. He was considered chinny, he robotic, and yeah, he wasn't a great heavyweight, but he was a good one, and he competed in a decent era. And there's no shame in taking Tim Witherspoon 11 rounds, and he had that. I mean, he fought Tyson twice. The second one was very disappointing. I thought Frank looked a bit intimidated, or not. His mind wasn't on the job anyway in the second one. In the first one, he really took it to Tyson. Bone Crusher Smith was a very hard puncher. He knocked Frank out in the last round. But nevertheless, he was better, and than people think he was. This seems to be the way people's minds are. At the time, we don't appreciate what we've got in front of our own eyes. And I think that's a real shame, because I think, although Anthony Joshua, I wouldn't call him, I wouldn't put him in the best top 10 heavyweights of all time, but I think he's a lot better than people think, a lot better. And I think when his career is over, and of course it's still going, and he'll probably pick up another defeat or two by the end of it, and he'll probably pick up, quite a few good wins as well. You can't really judge someone until their career's over. And you have to bear that in mind, I think. And yes, I think it's very valid to point out that some of the great champions of the past weren't appreciated until after their careers were over. So just a few thoughts on Lennox Lewis, and most importantly of all, Anthony Joshua. He's the current fighter, obviously, and I think his last year, 2023, was a good building year for him, rebuilding year, you might say. So yeah, let me know what you think. What do you think about this? Can you name any other fighters who weren't appreciated until after their career was over? Let me know what you think. And I'll obviously read all your comments, and I'll answer as many as I can. And as always, thank you for your time. Please, if you're new to the channel, you could subscribe. That'd be a fantastic help. And also hit the like button. Thanks a lot. I'll catch you later. Bye for now.